Naomi Dawson's world is turned upside down when her pregnancy leads to workplace discrimination by her CEO, Ethan Reynolds. Once a valued employee, Naomi is quietly pushed aside, but she refuses to back down. As tensions rise, Naomi takes a stand, launching a legal battle that could expose deeper truths about her company. Will she find justice or be silenced by a powerful system? If you're ready for a gripping story of resilience and courage, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. And comment below, how would you handle being in Naomi's shoes? The early morning sun streamed through the tall glass windows of the corporate tower, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Naomi Dawson stood in the lobby of Reynolds International, a sprawling corporate giant in downtown Atlanta, waiting for the elevator to take her up to her office. She had worked here for 7 years, starting as an intern fresh out of college, and climbing the ranks through hard work, dedication, and sheer determination. Now, she was one of the most trusted executive assistants in the company, working directly under the CEO, Ethan Reynolds. Her reflection in the elevator doors showed a poised, confident woman, but Naomi felt anything but steady inside. She smoothed the front of her soft lavender blouse, her hand lingering over the small, barely noticeable swell of her stomach. 4 months pregnant. She had known this moment would come, the moment she would have to tell Ethan, but the thought of it still made her stomach churn. Naomi was proud of her career. She had always balanced her personal and professional lives with grace, and the idea of her pregnancy interfering with her work didn't sit well with her. She was more than capable of handling both. But she also knew Ethan Reynolds too well, knew how he valued perfection, how he demanded relentless commitment. He was a man who didn't tolerate excuses, and Naomi had seen him dismiss employees for far less than what he might see as the burden of an expecting mother. The elevator chimed, and Naomi stepped inside, the quiet hum of the corporate machine all around her. Offices like this always had an energy to theme a rush that propelled everyone forward, striving for more. But today, Naomi felt a weight dragging her down, an invisible force holding her back. As she reached her floor, she took a deep breath, trying to steel her nerves. She had been through worse. She had faced challenges in this company before, overcome obstacles as a woman of color in a predominantly white, male-dominated environment, and she hadn't let any of that stop her. This wouldn't stop her either. Still, as she walked past rows of desks, her colleagues immersed in their tasks, she couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. Ethan's office was located in the far corner of the floor, a sleek, imposing space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an impressive view of the city skyline. Naomi had been in there countless times before, but today felt different. She approached the frosted glass doors, her reflection distorted and blurred, much like her feelings at that moment. Inside her, excitement for her pregnancy mingled with anxiety about how it would change everything, her body, her routine, her career. Naomi clutched the manila folder she carried, though the documents inside weren't what weighed on her. The words she was about to say were. Her fingers tightened around the handle as she pushed the door open, stepping into the expansive office. Sunlight streamed across Ethan's polished mahogany desk, reflecting off the minimalist decor, cold and efficient, just like the man who sat behind it. Naomi, Ethan acknowledged without looking up from his computer, his fingers tapping across the keyboard in a practiced rhythm. His voice was clipped, professional, always professional. Ethan was in his mid-40s, tall, with sharp features and silver streaks in his otherwise dark hair. His reputation as a corporate titan was well-earned, but Naomi had seen the other side of him. The side that viewed people as tools disposable if they no longer served his purpose. "What can I do for you?" he asked, still not looking at her. Naomi swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head a dozen times, but standing there in front of him, the words felt heavier. I wanted to let you know that I'm pregnant." The typing stopped. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a split second, before he slowly leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. He finally looked at her, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Pregnant," he repeated, as though testing the word. rolling it over in his mind. Yes, Naomi said, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her stomach. "I'm 4 months along." Ethan's face remained impassive, but Naomi could sense the shift. There was no warmth, no genuine happiness for her. Instead, a slight crease formed between his eyebrows, barely noticeable. But Naomi had worked with him long enough to recognize the signal of displeasure. "Well, congratulations, I suppose," Ethan said after a pause, his tone polite but cold, as if this news was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "How are you feeling?" "I'm feeling fine," Naomi replied, her hands resting instinctively over her small bump. "And I plan to continue working without any interruptions." Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze hardening ever so slightly. "That's good to hear," he said. "But you know, it can be difficult for women to juggle a pregnancy and a demanding career. These next few months are going to be crucial for the company. We can't afford anyone not performing at their best." There it was, the thinly veiled warning Naomi had been expecting. The subtext was clear. Her pregnancy was already a problem in his eyes, something that would hinder her ability to contribute to the company's success. Naomi forced herself to stay composed. She had worked too hard, too long, to let him push her out now. "I'm more than capable of handling my workload, Ethan," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I haven't let anything slip so far, and I don't plan to." Ethan studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "Of course. Your health comes first, but as I said, priorities can shift during a pregnancy. I've seen it happen before. It's hard to focus on work when you're expecting." The word expecting came out like a barb, carrying with it an undercurrent of doubt. Naomi could feel it, the way he was already reducing her in his mind, already deciding that she wouldn't be able to keep up with the demands of the job. "I understand your concerns," Naomi said carefully, choosing her words with precision. "But I assure you, my commitment to this job hasn't changed. I'll continue to give my best." Ethan held her gaze for a moment longer before nodding again, more slowly this time. "All right, Naomi. Well, see how things go. Just keep me informed if anything changes. I need to know immediately if there are any issues." "Of course," Naomi replied, forcing a smile. But inside, her frustration was growing, bubbling just beneath the surface. As she turned to leave, her hand resting on the door, she heard Ethan's voice again. "Oh, and Naomi," he added, his tone carrying a faint edge of condescension. "Try not to overdo it. I wouldn't want you to get overwhelmed." Naomi froze for a moment, her back still to him, her eyes closing as she swallowed the surge of anger rising within her. She took a deep breath, then opened the door. "Thank you for your concern, Ethan," she said through gritted teeth before walking out. As the door clicked shut behind her, Naomi let out a shaky breath. The conversation had gone exactly as she had feared. Ethan's words had sounded supportive on the surface, but underneath, they were laced with doubt, with dismissal. He didn't believe she could handle both the job and her pregnancy, and he wasn't even trying to hide it. Back at her desk, Naomi sat down, placing the manila folder in front of her, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She had known this was going to be easy. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that Ethan would be more understanding, more supportive. But deep down, she wasn't surprised. This was how the corporate world worked. She had always been a minority in more ways than one of the few women, one of the few people of color, and now one of the only pregnant women in a leadership position. She had faced her fair share of challenges to get to where she was, and this was just another hurdle. But that didn't make it any less frustrating. The next few days passed in a blur, with Naomi diving back into her work, determined to prove Ethan wrong. She coordinated meetings, handled logistics for high-level projects, and continued to perform at the top of her game, despite the growing exhaustion that came with her pregnancy. But slowly, subtly, things began to change. Naomi's calendar, once packed with high-level meetings and important projects, started to look empty. Emails trickled in with menial tasks, organizing files, rearranging schedules, things she could have done in her sleep. Meanwhile, the projects she had been leading, the meetings she had once been a part of, were quietly reassigned to other colleagues. One afternoon, Naomi opened her calendar and frowned. Several of the larger meetings she had been involved in had been suddenly moved to other executive assistants, mostly younger, white women who hadn't been at the company nearly as long as she had. Rachel Scott, one of the newer assistants, had been given several of Naomi's key projects, and while Rachel seemed surprised, she said nothing. Naomi tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just a coincidence. But as the days went on, the pattern continued. More emails came in, each one delegating tasks to others that Naomi had once been responsible for. Her workload became lighter, but not in a way that made her feel relieved, in a way that made her feel invisible. By the end of the second week, Naomi's frustration had reached a boiling point. She sat at her desk, staring at an email from Ethan's office that asked her to organize a file system for a project she had once led. It was insulting, like asking a surgeon to hand out Band-Aids. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, tempted to fire back a response, but she stopped herself. She knew better than to react too quickly. Instead, she hit reply, typing a polite acknowledgement, even though her mind was racing with anger. Later that afternoon, Naomi overheard two of her colleagues talking near the break room. They were discussing one of the projects she had regularly managed before her pregnancy. "I don't get why they took Naomi off it," one of them said, frowning. "She's always been solid." The other shrugged, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Ethan probably thinks she's got too much on her plate with the baby coming." Naomi pretended to busy herself with the coffee machine. Her back turned to them as she bit back the wave of anger threatening to overwhelm her. It wasn't about her workload. It was about her pregnancy. Ethan had decided, without saying a word, that she couldn't handle the job anymore, and now he was quietly pushing her aside. When she returned to her desk, another email was waiting for her. This time, it was a notice for a departmental meeting she had coordinated for months, but her name was no longer listed as the point of contact. Instead, Rachel Scott had been given the lead role. Naomi stared at the screen, her frustration mounting. Ethan wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He was systematically removing her from key responsibilities, all while pretending it was for her own benefit. He was doing it subtly enough that it would be hard to prove anything, but Naomi knew exactly what he was doing. Her hand clenched into a fist by her side. She had worked too hard to let this happen. Ethan might think he could quietly push her out, but he was wrong. She wasn't going anywhere. Naomi sat at her desk the following Monday, trying to focus on the list of menial tasks that now filled her inbox. The once vibrant excitement she felt coming to work had been replaced by a gnawing sense of frustration and dread. She had worked too hard to reach this point in her career, only to feel like she was being pushed aside, invisible in a company where she had once thrived. As the hours ticked by, the steady hum of office life around her barely registered. Naomi had been excluded from a high-level strategy meeting that afternoon, a meeting she would normally have been instrumental in coordinating. Her replacement for the project, Rachel Scott, was probably in there right now, navigating her way through discussions Naomi had helped shape from the start. It wasn't Rachel's fault, Naomi knew that. Rachel had always been kind, if a bit naive, and probably had no idea she was being used as a pawn in Ethan's game. But knowing that didn't ease the sting. Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that her career was slowly slipping away from her, and no one, not even her closest colleagues, seemed to notice. Later that afternoon, Naomi found herself staring at an email from Linda Collins, the head of HR. It was polite, professional like all of Linda's emails, but the content was anything but comforting. "Naomi, just checking in to see how things are going with your workload. Ethan has mentioned some concerns about whether you're feeling overwhelmed due to your pregnancy. If there's anything we can do to accommodate you, please let me know. Best, Linda Collins, HR Director." Naomi's jaw tightened as she read the message. She could almost hear Linda's voice as she typed the words, detached, distant, and completely complicit. This wasn't a genuine inquiry about her well-being. It was a thinly veiled excuse to justify stripping her of her responsibilities. Ethan was covering his tracks, making it seem as though he was concerned about her health, when, in reality, he was setting the stage to push her out completely. Naomi's fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type a scathing response. But then she paused. She needed to be strategic. If she lashed out now, if she responded with anger, it would play right into their hands. They wanted her to look emotional, unstable, like her pregnancy was affecting her ability to think clearly. Instead, Naomi took a deep breath and typed a measured reply. "Hi, Linda. Thank you for checking in. My workload has actually decreased significantly in recent weeks, and am feeling capable of managing everything. I haven't experienced any difficulties balancing my responsibilities. Best, Naomi Dawson." She hit send, her pulse quickening. It wasn't the response she wanted to give, but it was the one she needed to give. She couldn't afford to lose her composure now, not when Ethan was watching her every move. The weeks dragged on, and the subtle hostility from Ethan grew more obvious with each passing day. Meetings Naomi had once been essential to were being held without her. Key projects she had spearheaded were handed off to others, often with no explanation. Each time she opened her calendar, it was as if more and more of her responsibilities were vanishing, reassigned to junior staff members or colleagues who had far less experience. One morning, Naomi walked past the conference room where a major quarterly review meeting was taking place. It was the type of meeting she used to lead, preparing financial reports, analyzing the company's performance, and presenting her findings to Ethan and the other executives. But today, as she peered through the glass doors, she saw Rachel at the head of the table, nervously shuffling through papers as she presented the numbers Naomi had painstakingly gathered and analyzed over the past year. Naomi's heart clenched. It wasn't just that she had been replaced. It was the way it was happening. Ethan was erasing her contributions, step by step, and everyone around her seemed to be turning a blind eye. By the time Naomi returned to her desk, her frustration had morphed into something sharper, something more dangerous. She couldn't let this continue. Ethan was quietly sabotaging her, hoping she would just give up, fade into the background, and leave on her own. But Naomi had no intention of going quietly. She opened her personal email, the one she had been using to document every slight, every undermining comment, and every instance of her work being reassigned. The file was growing thicker by the day, and with each new entry, Naomi's resolve hardened. She wouldn't confront Ethan directly, at least, not yet. But she was building a case, one that would be impossible to ignore. That afternoon, as Naomi sat at her desk, her phone buzzed with a text from her husband, Jason. He was still stationed overseas, and their communication had been limited to short phone calls and texts whenever his schedule allowed. She missed him more than she could say, especially now. "How are you holding up?" Jason's text read. Naomi sighed, her fingers typing quickly as she responded. "It's getting worse. Ethan's trying to push me out. I'm sure of it. Has reassigned almost all of my projects, and no one is saying anything. It's like they all see it, but no one wants to get involved." Jason's response came quickly. "I'm so sorry, Naomi. I wish I could be there with you. But I know you're strong. You've fought for everything you have, and you're not going to let him win. Don't let him make you feel small." Tears pricked Naomi's eyes, but she blinked them away. Jason had always been her rock, her steadying force. Even from halfway across the world, he knew exactly what to say to keep her grounded. "I won't let him win," Naomi typed back. "I'm documenting everything. I'm not going to let him push me out." "Good," Jason replied. "You've got this. And soon enough, he'll be back, and we'll handle it together." Naomi smiled, feeling a bit lighter. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had Jason, even if he was miles away. And more importantly, she had herself. Ethan could try to undermine her all he wanted, but she wasn't going anywhere. A week later, the tension finally reached its breaking point. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and Naomi had just finished organizing files for a minor project Ethan had dumped on her work that should have been handled by a junior assistant, not someone in her position. She had been reduced to nothing more than a glorified clerk, and everyone in the office seemed to know it. As she walked past the conference room on her way to grab a coffee, she overheard Ethan's voice inside, talking to one of the senior executives. "She's a liability," Ethan was saying, his voice low but filled with frustration. "I knew this would happen. We hire someone like her, and then this pregnancy nonsense. It's going to be a nightmare when she can't keep up." We'll have to find someone else eventually. Naomi froze just outside the door, her heart hammering in her chest. She knew she shouldn't be eavesdropping, but she couldn't help it. She needed to hear this. The other executive chuckled, his voice deep and dismissive. What did you expect? She's pregnant now, probably distracted by it. These people, they always have something that comes up. I bet Shell want more time off for the kid. Naomi's stomach twisted. These people. She knew exactly what he meant. Her pregnancy wasn't the only thing they were talking about. Ethan laughed softly, his tone smug. Yeah, probably. I'm not trying to sound harsh, but I should have known better than to trust someone like her with that kind of responsibility. It's just too much now. We'll have to start looking for a replacement. Naomi felt a cold rush of anger. It was one thing to be sidelined, it was another to be openly dismissed like this, reduced to a stereotype, a liability in Ethan's eyes. Her race, her pregnancy, they were using it all against her, painting her as someone who couldn't keep up simply because of who she was and the life she was bringing into the world. She took a deep breath, fighting to keep her composure as she backed away from the door. Her hands were shaking as she walked back to her desk, her mind spinning. Ethan wasn't just undermining her, no, he was preparing to replace her. She sat down, her fingers trembling as she opened her email and added another entry to her documentation. But this time, she wrote more furiously, the weight of Ethan's words pressing down on her like a leaden burden. Overheard Ethan Reynolds in a private conversation, implying that my pregnancy and race make me a liability, documenting as further evidence for potential legal action. When she was done, Naomi sat back, her heart still pounding in her chest. She couldn't stay silent anymore. Ethan wasn't just pushing her aside, he was actively trying to replace her. And he was using her pregnancy and her race as the justification. Naomi knew that confronting him head-on wouldn't work. Not yet, but she had enough evidence now, enough documentation to take this to the next level. She had been gathering it for weeks, and now it was time to make a move. Without hesitation, Naomi pulled out her phone and dialed the number for Marcus Shaw, the civil rights attorney she had spoken to briefly a few weeks ago. She had been waiting for the right moment, and now she knew she couldn't wait any longer. Marcus Shaw, came the calm voice on the other end. Mr. Shaw, it's Naomi Dawson, she said, her voice tight but determined. I'm ready to move forward with the case. The day after Naomi made the call to Marcus Shaw, the civil rights attorney, felt surreal. The decision to move forward with legal action weighed on her heavily, but at the same time, it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. She had spent so long documenting every slight, every undermining comment, every reassigned task, that the act of reaching out for help made her feel like she was finally fighting back. She sat at her desk in her now painfully quiet office, surrounded by the hum of everyday corporate life. To her colleagues, everything seemed normal, just another day at Reynolds International. But to Naomi, everything had changed. She knew what was coming. Marcus had been calm and reassuring on the phone. Well, take this one step at a time, he'd said. You've done the right thing by documenting everything, and that will be crucial. But you need to prepare yourself. Once we file, it's going to get harder before it gets easier. Naomi knew he was right. She had no illusions about how this would play out. Ethan Reynolds wasn't the type to roll over easily. He would fight, and he would use everything at his disposal to discredit her. But Naomi was prepared. She had to be. As she waited for Marcus to finalize the paperwork, Naomi kept her head down, pretending everything was business as usual. She completed the menial tasks Ethan had assigned her, reorganizing files, managing minor projects that barely required her attention, and tried to avoid the gaze of her colleagues. Some of them still seemed oblivious to what was happening, but others had started to notice the changes. Naomi could feel the weight of their unspoken questions whenever she passed them in the hallway. But no one said a word. No one asked her how she was doing or if she needed help. It was as if they were all afraid to get involved, afraid that standing too close to Naomi might make them a target too. The more Naomi tried to keep up appearances, the more isolated she felt. Her once vibrant career had been reduced to little more than busy work, and the sense of alienation weighed heavily on her. There were days when she questioned her decision to stay at the company, to keep fighting when it felt like the entire system was working against her. She missed the camaraderie she used to feel with her colleagues, the sense of belonging that came from being part of something larger. But now, the office felt like an alien landscape, filled with people who pretended not to see what was happening to her. Every day was a reminder that she was no longer seen as an equal, no longer respected for the work she had done or the contributions she had made. One afternoon, Naomi sat in the break room staring into her coffee cup, lost in thought. She had always prided herself on her resilience, on her ability to rise above challenges. But this felt different. She was fighting a battle she couldn't win on her own, and the loneliness of that reality gnawed at her. As she sat there, Rachel Scott walked in, carrying a stack of files. Rachel had been given more and more of Naomi's responsibilities in recent weeks, and while Naomi didn't blame her directly, it was hard not to feel the sting of betrayal each time Rachel took over a project Naomi had once led. "Hey, Naomi," Rachel said, her voice cheerful but cautious. She hesitated for a moment before adding, "How's everything going?" Naomi forced a smile. "It's fine. Just keeping busy." Rachel nodded, glancing around the room as if searching for something to say. "I've been meaning to ask you, okay, with all the changes lately. I mean, with some of the projects being reassigned and everything." Naomi raised an eyebrow, surprised that Rachel had even noticed. "It's been an adjustment," she said carefully, not wanting to give too much away. "But I'm managing." Rachel nodded again, clearly unsure how to respond. She shifted awkwardly, then offered Naomi a small smile. "If you ever need help with anything, just let me know." Naomi watched her leave, a bitter taste in her mouth. She knew Rachel meant well, but it didn't change the fact that she was part of the system that was pushing Naomi out. It was hard to see kindness in Rachel's offer when it came with the unspoken understanding that she had already taken Naomi's place. Naomi returned to her desk, her mind racing. The walls of the office seemed to be closing in on her, and the isolation felt suffocating. She pulled out her phone and dialed Jason's number, hoping to catch him during one of his breaks. "Naomi," Jason's voice came through the line, calm and steady as always. "How are you holding up?" "I'm trying," Naomi said, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced around the office, making sure no one could overhear her. "It's getting harder every day. I feel like everyone's watching me, waiting for me to break. Ethan's still playing his games, and now I don't know, I feel invisible." Jason was quiet for a moment before he spoke again. "You're not invisible, Naomi. You're still the same strong, brilliant woman you've always been. They might be trying to make you feel small, but you're bigger than all of this. You're fighting back. And you're not alone." Naomi closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. She didn't feel strong right now, but hearing Jason's voice reminded her that she wasn't in this alone. She had support, even if it wasn't physically present. "I know," she said softly. "I just wish you were here." "I wish I was too," Jason replied. "But we'll get through this. You're doing the right thing, Naomi. Don't let them make you doubt that." A week later, Naomi sat in Marcus Shaw's office, surrounded by legal documents and case files. The office was small but professional, with framed degrees on the walls and stacks of neatly organized paperwork on the desk. Marcus, a sharp and meticulous lawyer in his late 30s, sat across from Naomi, reviewing the final details of the lawsuit. "You've done an excellent job documenting everything," Marcus said, flipping through the thick folder Naomi had provided. "This is exactly the kind of evidence we need to build a strong case." Naomi nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had spent months gathering the evidence, every email, every reassigned task, every overheard comment. It was all there, a record of the systematic discrimination she had faced. But knowing they had a strong case didn't ease the knot of anxiety in her stomach. "I've never been through anything like this before," Naomi admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. "What happens next?" Marcus set the folder down and leaned forward, his expression serious but reassuring. "Once we file the lawsuit, it's going to get more intense. Ethan's legal team will likely try to delay the case, maybe even attempt to discredit you. But with the evidence you've collected, we have a solid foundation. The goal is to make them realize that fighting this won't be worth the risk." Naomi swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but hearing it laid out so plainly made it all feel more real. The thought of Ethan's legal team coming after her, trying to paint her as emotional or unreliable, filled her with dread. But she had come too far to back down now. "I'm ready," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "I'm not going to let him get away with this." Marcus smiled, a small but encouraging gesture. "Good. He'll file the paperwork this afternoon, and from there, we'll take it step by step. Remember, you're not alone in this. He'll be with you every step of the way." As Naomi left Marcus' office that afternoon, the weight of the legal battle ahead settled on her shoulders. She knew it was going to be a long, difficult fight, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't just documenting her pain anymore, she was actively fighting back. The day after the lawsuit was filed, Naomi arrived at the office with a newfound sense of purpose. She had taken the first real step toward holding Ethan accountable. And although the road ahead was uncertain, she felt stronger knowing she wasn't going to suffer in silence anymore. But as soon as she entered the building, she could feel the shift in the air. The usual buzz of the office was subdued, conversations muted, and eyes darted toward her as she walked by. Word had already spread. People knew. By the time Naomi reached her desk, she noticed a message waiting for her in her inbox and email from Ethan Reynolds himself. "Naomi, please come to my office at your earliest convenience. We need to discuss an important matter. Best regards, Ethan Reynolds." Naomi's pulse quickened. She knew this was coming, but the directness of the message still sent a jolt through her. She stood up, smoothing the front of her blouse, and made her way to Ethan's office. When she entered, Ethan was sitting behind his desk, his expression unreadable. He gestured for her to sit, his movements sharp and controlled. "Naomi," he began, his voice as calm as ever, but there was a tension in his tone that hadn't been there before. "I understand you filed a lawsuit against the company." Naomi didn't flinch. She met his gaze, refusing to let him intimidate her. "Yes, I have." Ethan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. "I'm disappointed to hear that. I thought we had always maintained a professional relationship, but this feels unnecessary." Naomi's jaw clenched. "It's necessary," she said, her voice firm. "You've systematically undermined me since I announced my pregnancy. You've stripped me of my responsibilities, reassigned my projects, and treated me as if I'm no longer capable of doing my job. I've documented everything, Ethan. This isn't about personal feelings, it's about the way you've treated me." Ethan's eyes narrowed, but his expression remained composed. "I've only done what's best for the company." "Your pregnancy. My pregnancy has nothing to do with my ability to perform my job," Naomi interrupted, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "This isn't just about pregnancy, Ethan. It's about races, too. I heard what you said about me. You called me a liability. You and your colleagues made racist remarks about these people. You can't hide behind professionalism anymore." For a moment the mask slipped. Ethan's expression darkened, a flash of anger crossing his face before he quickly composed himself. "This conversation is over," he said, his voice icy. "I suggest you reconsider your position, Naomi. This lawsuit will not end the way you think it will." Naomi stood up, her heart pounding but her resolve stronger than ever. "I've made my decision, Ethan. I'm not backing down." She walked out of his office, her pulse racing. She had stood up to him finally. After all these months of suffering in silence, she had told him exactly what she thought. And now there was no going back. The days following Naomi's confrontation with Ethan Reynolds felt like the calm before a storm. The tension in the office was palpable. Every glance from her colleagues seemed heavier. Every whispered conversation felt like it was about her. Though no one openly addressed the lawsuit, Naomi could tell that the news had spread like wildfire throughout the company. She was now a focal point, not just for Ethan, but for everyone who had turned a blind eye to what was happening. Still, Naomi kept her head down and focused on her work, completing the insignificant tasks that had been relegated to her. Meanwhile, Marcus Shaw, her civil rights attorney, was working tirelessly behind the scenes, to prepare for the upcoming legal battle. One afternoon, as Naomi sat at her desk organizing a mundane set of files, her phone rang. She quickly recognized the number Marcus. "Naomi," Marcus said when she answered, his tone calm but serious. "I've just received word from Ethan's legal team. They're preparing their defense, and it's clear they're going to fight hard. I wanted to give you a heads up. Things are about to get intense." Naomi swallowed, a knot tightening in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "They're going to try to discredit you," Marcus explained. "They'll claim that you were underperforming, that your pregnancy affected your ability to work, and they'll use anything they can find to make you look unreliable. But you need to remember, you have the evidence. You've documented everything, and we'll use that to our advantage. They're playing dirty, but we're prepared." Naomi clenched her fist, her heart pounding. She had expected this, but hearing it out loud made it all feel more real. Ethan wasn't just trying to push her out quietly anymore. He was going to fight back with everything he had, and he wasn't above attacking her character to win. "I'm ready," Naomi said, though her voice wavered slightly. "I knew this would happen, but I won't let him win." Marcus' voice softened, sensing her anxiety. "You're not alone in this, Naomi. We'll fight back. You've done everything right up to this point, and we're not backing down." After the call ended, Naomi sat in silence for a moment, her thoughts racing. She had known this fight would get ugly, but she hadn't anticipated the emotional toll it would take. The idea of having her professionalism and integrity questioned, of being portrayed as unreliable or emotional, made her stomach turn. She had worked so hard for so long to build her career, and now Ethan was trying to tear it all down. But she couldn't let him. Not after everything he had done. Not after the comments, the discrimination, the months of silent suffering. Naomi had come too far to let Ethan's legal team intimidate her now. The stress of the lawsuit began to bleed into Naomi's personal life. She had always been able to balance the demands of her job with her home life, but now the constant pressure weighed on her like a heavy cloak she couldn't shake off. Her husband Jason was still stationed overseas, and though they spoke on the phone as often as possible, the distance between them felt more unbearable than ever. Each time she heard his voice, there was a pang of longing in her chest, a desire to have him there with her, to feel his arms around her, and to lean on him for support. One night, after a particularly grueling day at work, Naomi sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone, waiting for Jason's call. She had told him about the lawsuit, about how Ethan's team was preparing to attack her credibility. And though Jason had been nothing but supportive, the anxiety still gnawed at her. When the phone finally buzzed, Naomi answered quickly, her voice trembling slightly. "Hey, Naomi," Jason's voice came through, warm and familiar. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," Naomi said, though even she didn't believe her own words. "It's just a lot. They're going to come after me, Jason. They're going to try to make me look like I can't handle my job." Jason was silent for a moment, then his voice came through, steady and calm. "Naomi, you're one of the strongest people I know. You've always handled everything thrown at you with grace and determination. Don't let them make you doubt yourself. You know the truth, you've been fighting this fight for months. You're not alone in this. I'm with you, even if I can't be there physically." Naomi bit her lip, fighting back tears. I feel so alone sometimes. Like no one else really understands what this is like." Jason's voice softened. "I wish I could be there with you. But you're stronger than you realize, Naomi. You've already shown that. And soon, this will all be over, and we'll be together again." Naomi nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I know. I'm scared, Jason. What if they win? What if? What if this ruins everything?" "They won't win," Jason said firmly. "You've got the truth on your side, and you've got a great lawyer. Trust yourself, Naomi. You've come this far, and you're not giving up now." As they ended the call, Naomi felt a small sense of relief. Jason's words had grounded her, reminded her of the strength she had inside. She wasn't alone in this fight, and no matter how hard Ethan and his legal team came after her, she wasn't going to back down. A few weeks later, Naomi found herself sitting in a small conference room at the courthouse, across from Ethan Reynolds and his legal team. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with the weight of the impending legal battle. Ethan sat at the other end of the table, his expression calm and collected, as if the lawsuit meant nothing to him. But Naomi could feel the tension in the room. Ethan might have been playing it cool, but she knew him well enough to see the cracks in his facade. He was worried, and he had every right to be. Marcus sat beside Naomi, his calm presence a constant source of reassurance. He had spent weeks preparing for this, and Naomi knew that he had a strategy in place to counter whatever tactics Ethan's team tried to use. The hearing was relatively brief, mostly procedural. Ethan's team had filed a motion to dismiss the case, claiming that Naomi's allegations were baseless and that the company had acted appropriately in light of her pregnancy. But Marcus was quick to push back, presenting the evidence Naomi had meticulously gathered over the past few months. Emails, reassigned tasks, overheard conversations, it was all laid out clearly and methodically, leaving little room for doubt. Marcus made it clear that this was just a case of pregnancy discrimination, it was also about race. Naomi had been treated differently, not only because she was pregnant, but because she was a black woman in a position of power, something that had made her a target in a predominantly white, male-dominated corporate environment. The judge listened carefully to both sides, asking a few pointed questions along the way. Naomi could feel her heart racing in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had done everything she could to prepare for this moment, and now it was in the hands of the court. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally ruled that the case would move forward. The motion to dismiss was denied. Naomi let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her hands trembling slightly. Marcus turned to her, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "We're in," he said quietly. "Now we fight." As Naomi left the courthouse that day, a sense of relief washed over her. It was only the first step in what would likely be a long, grueling process, but for the first time, she felt like she had a real chance. Ethan's team hadn't been able to brush her aside, and now they would have to face the truth. The relief Naomi felt after the hearing was short-lived. As expected, Ethan and his legal team wasted no time launching a counterattack. Within days, they had begun filing motions and submitting documents designed to slow the process down, hoping to wear Naomi down before the case could even reach trial. Naomi received a barrage of emails from Ethan's team, filled with accusations that she had been underperforming for months, that her pregnancy had made her unfocused, and that her reassignment of duties had been purely a business decision. They even tried to paint her as overly emotional, suggesting that her reaction to the changes in her workload had been disproportionate and driven by personal feelings rather than legitimate grievances. But Naomi refused to be rattled. She forwarded every email to Marcus, who was quick to push back against each new tactic. They had anticipated this, and Marcus remained confident that their case was strong enough to withstand whatever distractions Ethan's team tried to create. Still, the constant barrage of legal paperwork and accusations took its toll on Naomi. The weight of the fight was heavy, and there were days when she wondered if it would ever end. Despite the mounting pressure, Naomi refused to give in. Every time Ethan's team tried to discredit her, she found new resolve. The fight was exhausting, and there were moments when the stress felt overwhelming, but she reminded herself of why she was doing this, not just for herself, but for her unborn child, for her family, and for every woman who had been made to feel small in the workplace. Jason's support continued to be her lifeline. Though they were still miles apart, his words of encouragement kept her grounded. And Marcus, with his steady guidance, reassured her that they were on the right path. As the weeks turned into months, Naomi could feel the tide beginning to turn. More evidence surfaced, more witnesses came forward, and the cracks in Ethan's defense became harder to ignore. Naomi's strength, her perseverance, was paying off. As the trial date drew nearer, Naomi felt the weight of the impending battle pressing down on her like never before. Her days were filled with meetings with Marcus Shaw, preparing for every possible question and scenario. Marcus had been calm throughout the process, but now his tone was more serious, his advice sharper, as they prepared for the final showdown with Ethan Reynolds. "You need to be ready for this," Marcus warned, as they sat in his office one evening. "Ethan's legal team is going to come at you hard. They're going to try to twist your words, make you seem irrational, emotional. But remember, you're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong." Naomi nodded, her hands folded in her lap. She had gone over the details of the case so many times she could recite them by heart: every email, every reassigned task, every offhand comment about her pregnancy or race. But the reality of sitting in a courtroom facing Ethan and his lawyers felt daunting. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves churning in her stomach. "I've been waiting for this for months. I won't let them tear me down." Marcus smiled, a small gesture of encouragement. "Good. Because once this trial starts, everything you've been through will be laid bare. It's going to be emotional, but stay focused. We have a strong case, and we're going to win." Naomi took a deep breath, nodding again. The trial was just days away, and while the fear of being in the spotlight lingered in the back of her mind, she knew she had no choice but to fight. Ethan wasn't just going to walk away from this, he was going to be held accountable, no matter how hard he tried to deny it. The morning of the trial, Naomi stood outside the courthouse, taking in the early morning air. The streets buzzed with activity, reporters standing outside the building, waiting for a glimpse of the high-profile case. The lawsuit against Reynolds International had garnered significant media attention, and while Naomi had tried to avoid reading the articles and watching the news segments, she knew that all eyes were on her. Beside her, Marcus adjusted his suit, his expression serious but calm. "You ready?" he asked, glancing over at Naomi. Naomi nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm ready." As they entered the courthouse, the tension in the air grew thicker. Ethan Reynolds and his legal team were already seated at the defense table, Ethan's face a mask of cold professionalism. Naomi's stomach twisted as she saw him. He looked as confident as ever, as though the trial was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The judge entered the room and the trial officially began. Naomi sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly in front of her as she listened to the opening statements. Ethan's lawyer, a smooth-talking man in an expensive suit, tried to paint the lawsuit as a misunderstanding, claiming that Naomi's pregnancy had naturally led to changes in her workload, that Ethan had acted out of concern for her health. But when Marcus stood to deliver his opening remarks, the tone shifted. He spoke clearly and confidently, laying out the timeline of events with precision, highlighting the pattern of discrimination Naomi had faced. He made it clear that this was just about pregnancy, it was about race, about how Ethan had systematically undermined Naomi's authority and treated her as though she was less capable because of who she was. "This case is about power," Marcus said, his voice strong as he addressed the jury. "It's about the abuse of power in a corporate environment, and how one woman had the courage to stand up and say enough." Naomi felt a surge of emotion as Marcus spoke. This was her story, laid out for the world to see. She wasn't just another employee, she was someone who had fought back against the system, and now she was demanding justice. Over the next few days, the trial progressed at a steady pace. Marcus presented the evidence Naomi had spent months collecting: mails, documents, notes, detailing every meeting and conversation where she had been sidelined or undermined. He called witnesses to the stand, colleagues who had seen firsthand how Naomi's responsibilities had been stripped away without explanation, how she had been treated differently after announcing her pregnancy. Rachel Scott, the junior assistant who had been given many of Naomi's projects, was one of the key witnesses. She looked nervous as she took the stand, glancing at Naomi with a mixture of guilt and sympathy. "I didn't realize what was happening at first," Rachel admitted, her voice shaky. "But over time, it became clear that Naomi wasn't being included in the meetings she used to lead. Projects she had been working on were given to me, and it didn't make sense. She was more experienced than I was." Marcus nodded, encouraging her to continue. "And how did you feel about that?" Rachel hesitated, then spoke softly. "I felt uncomfortable. I didn't think it was fair." As Rachel stepped down from the stand, Naomi felt a mixture of gratitude and frustration. Rachel's testimony had been valuable, But it also reminded Naomi of how many people had stayed silent while she was being pushed aside. Still, the truth was finally coming out. The turning point came when Marcus played the recording Naomi had made, the one where Ethan had referred to her as a liability, and made racist remarks about these people. The courtroom fell silent as Ethan's voice filled the air, his words dripping with arrogance and disdain. Naomi watched the jury's faces as the recording played, seeing the shock and disgust in their expressions. There was no way to deny what they had just heard. Ethan's own words had condemned him. When it was time for Naomi to take the stand, she felt a surge of nerves, but also a deep sense of resolve. This was her moment to tell her story, to speak the truth about everything she had endured. Marcus guided her through the questioning with care, allowing Naomi to recount the events of the past several months in detail. She spoke about how her responsibilities had been quietly stripped away after she announced her pregnancy, how Ethan had made subtle but pointed remarks about her ability to manage her workload, and how she had been made to feel invisible in a company she had given so much to. "And how did that make you feel?" Naomi Marcus asked, his voice gentle but firm. Naomi hesitated, her throat tight with emotion. "It made me feel small," she said quietly. "Like all the work I'd done, all the years I'd spent building my career, didn't matter anymore. Like I was being pushed aside because I was no longer valuable to them. Not because of my abilities, but because of my pregnancy. And because of who I am." The courtroom was silent as Naomi spoke, her words hanging in the air like a weight. She could feel the eyes of the jury on her, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. The defense tried to cross-examine her, attempting to paint her as emotional and irrational, but Naomi held her ground. She answered every question calmly, refusing to be rattled by their attempts to undermine her credibility. By the time Naomi stepped down from the stand, she felt a sense of release. She had said everything she needed to say, and now the truth was out there for everyone to see. After days of testimony, the trial finally came to a close. The courtroom was tense as the jury deliberated, the minutes stretching into hours. Naomi sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she waited for the verdict. When the jury finally returned, Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. She could barely breathe as the foreperson stood to deliver the decision. In the case of Naomi Dawson versus Ethan Reynolds and Reynolds International, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Naomi Dawson. The words hit Naomi like a wave, washing over her with a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had won. She had done it. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the verdict was read, but all Naomi could hear was the rush of blood in her ears, the overwhelming sense of triumph that coursed through her. The judge continued, awarding Naomi a substantial financial settlement, but more importantly, ordering an independent investigation into the company's discriminatory practices. Ethan Reynolds, who had sat stone-faced throughout the trial, now looked pale and stunned, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around him. As Naomi stood to leave the courtroom, Marcus turned to her with a proud smile. "You did it," he said softly. Naomi nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "We did it!" The day after the verdict, Naomi stood in her new home, the morning sunlight spilling through the windows, casting a warm glow on the hardwood floors. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. The courtroom battle was behind her, and with it, the weight of carrying Ethan's cruelty. She had won not just in the eyes of the law, but for herself, her unborn child, and countless others who had faced the same quiet discrimination. As she looked around her new living room, boxes still unpacked from the move, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had brought her to this moment. The financial settlement she had won was more than enough to start fresh. It wasn't just about the money, though it was about having her dignity restored, about reclaiming the life that had been taken from her by a system that too often saw women, especially Black women, as expendable. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jason, her husband, who had returned from his overseas deployment shortly after the trial ended. He had been her rock throughout the process, even when miles separated them. Now, with the trial behind them, they were finally able to start thinking about their future as a family. On my way home. How's our little man doing? Jason's message read. Naomi smiled as she looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms. Isaiah was just a few weeks old, his tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. His presence had brought a new sense of purpose to Naomi's life. She had fought for him, for the future she wanted to give him, a future where he would grow up knowing that his mother had stood up for herself and won. Hez doing great. Just fell asleep, Naomi texted back, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. After the trial, the press had been relentless, and Naomi had done her best to shield her family from the constant media attention. News outlets had hailed the case as a landmark victory in the fight against workplace discrimination, and her name had become synonymous with courage and resilience. But Naomi wasn't interested in fame. All she wanted was to put the past behind her and focus on the future she and Jason were building together. A few weeks later, Naomi sat at the kitchen table scrolling through her emails. Her inbox was filled with messages from friends, colleagues, and strangers alike, people who had followed her case and reached out to express their admiration and support. Some shared their own stories of discrimination in the workplace. Others asked for advice on how to navigate similar battles. The response was overwhelming, and Naomi had found herself at the center of a larger conversation about systemic bias in corporate America. But today, one email stood out. It was from Linda Collins, the former head of HR at Reynolds International, who had quietly resigned shortly after the trial. Linda had kept her distance during the legal battle, and Naomi hadn't heard from her since. But now, the subject line of the email caught her attention. An invitation to help shape the future. Curious, Naomi opened the email. Naomi, I've been thinking about everything that happened at Reynolds International, and I've come to realize how much I could have done to prevent what you went through. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up, and for that, am deeply sorry. I've recently accepted a position at a new company as their diversity and inclusion director, and I want to do better this time. I'd like to invite you to collaborate with me on developing new policies and initiatives to ensure that no one else has to experience what you did. Your insight and voice could be invaluable in shaping the future of corporate culture. I hope you'll consider it. Warm regards, Linda Collins. Naomi stared at the email for a moment, a flood of emotions washing over her. She hadn't expected Linda to reach out, and part of her was still angry that Linda had stood by while Ethan had systematically undermined her. But at the same time, she knew how powerful it could be to turn this experience into something positive, to help other women and people of color navigate the challenges of corporate life, to create environments where they could thrive without fear of discrimination. After a moment's thought, Naomi hit reply. Linda, thank you for reaching out. I'd be happy to discuss how we can work together to create lasting change. Best, Naomi. As she hit send, Naomi felt a sense of closure. This was the next step in her journey, moving from the fight for justice to building something better for the future. She wasn't just a survivor of workplace discrimination, she was now in a position to create real change. Later that evening, Naomi sat on the porch with Jason, their son cradled between them in a soft blanket. The cool breeze of the evening brushed against their skin, and for the first time in months, the world felt quiet, peaceful. Jason looked down at Isaiah, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Hez perfect," he said, his voice filled with awe. "I still can't believe how lucky we are." Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "We are lucky," she said quietly, "and I'm so glad you're home." Jason had missed the birth of their son by just a few weeks, but he had returned in time to witness the final days of the trial and to help Naomi navigate the media storm that followed. His presence had been a balm to her soul, a reminder that she wasn't alone in any of this. "I've been thinking," Jason said, his voice serious but gentle, "about everything you went through at Reynolds. I know it's behind us now, but I want you to know how proud I am of you. You stood up for yourself, for our family, and for every person out there who's ever been treated like they're less than. What you did, it mattered." Naomi blinked back tears, her hand resting on Jason's arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you. Even when you were halfway across the world, I felt like you were with me every step of the way." Jason kissed the top of her head, his arms wrapping around her and Isaiah. "He'll always be with you, Naomi. We're in this together, no matter what." As they sat there, the stars beginning to twinkle above them, Naomi felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. The fight was over, and they had come through it stronger than ever. With Isaiah in their arms and a future full of possibilities ahead, they were ready to start this new chapter of their lives. In the months that followed, Naomi's life continued to change in ways she never expected. The collaboration with Linda Collins had blossomed into a full-fledged initiative, with Naomi playing a key role in shaping new corporate policies focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. She had become a sought-after speaker at conferences and workshops, sharing her story with others and advocating for systemic change in corporate environments. At first, Naomi had been hesitant to take on such a public role, worried that the attention might overshadow her desire for a peaceful, private life with her family. But the more she spoke out, the more she realized how important her voice was. There were so many women, people of color, pregnant employees who faced the same challenges she had, and her story gave them hope. It showed them that they didn't have to stay silent, that they could fight back and win. One afternoon, Naomi received an invitation to speak at a national conference on workplace equity. It was a prestigious event, one that would put her in front of hundreds of corporate leaders, policymakers, and advocates. The thought of standing on such a large stage was intimidating, but Naomi knew she had something important to say. Jason, as always, was supportive. "You've come this far," he reminded her. "You've got a story to tell, and it's one that can help change the world." Naomi smiled, feeling the weight of his words. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first walked into Ethan Reynolds' office to announce her pregnancy. She had grown stronger, braver, and more determined. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been made to feel small in the workplace. The day of the conference arrived, and Naomi stood backstage, waiting for her turn to speak. Her heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't fear that gripped her, it was a sense of purpose, a deep knowledge that her words could make a difference. When her name was called, Naomi stepped out onto the stage, the bright lights shining down on her as the audience applauded. She took a deep breath, glancing out at the sea of faces before her, and began to speak. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today," she began, her voice steady and clear. "When I started my career, I believed that if I worked hard enough, if I gave everything I had, I'd be rewarded for my efforts. But what I didn't realize was that there are systems in place that make it harder for people like me, women, people of color, to succeed. And when I announced my pregnancy, those systems became impossible to ignore." Naomi paused, letting her words sink in. "But I didn't give up. I fought back. Not just for myself, but for every person who's ever been told they don't belong. For every person who's ever been pushed aside or made to feel small. And today, I stand here as proof that we can fight back and we can win." The audience erupted into applause, but Naomi remained calm, her heart full. She wasn't just a victim of workplace discrimination anymore. She was a leader, a voice for change, and her fight had just begun. As Naomi left the stage, she felt a sense of closure, but also of new beginnings. There was still so much work to be done, but she was ready. She had built a life she could be proud of, a legacy that would inspire others to stand up for themselves and demand the respect they deserved. And most importantly, she had shown her son, Isaiah, that his mother was a fighter, that she had risen above the obstacles placed in her path, and created a future where anything was possible. Months had passed since Naomi's speech at the national conference, but the momentum it sparked showed no signs of slowing down. Her inbox was flooded with requests from universities wanting her to speak to students about workplace equity, to corporations seeking her advice on how to implement real diversity and inclusion policies. She had quickly become one of the leading voices in the fight for fair treatment in corporate America. But despite her new role as an advocate and public speaker, Naomi always made time for what mattered most to her family. Isaiah, now almost a year old, was thriving, filling their home with laughter and love. Jason had taken on a job closer to home, ensuring he could be there for both Naomi and Isaiah. And together, they had settled into a peaceful, fulfilling life. One morning, as Naomi sat in her home office reviewing notes for an upcoming panel on corporate ethics, she received a call that gave her pause. It was from Margaret Green, the CEO of a major tech company that had been rocked by a public scandal involving discriminatory hiring practices. Margaret wanted Naomi to consult on a complete overhaul of the company's culture, a daunting task, but one Naomi felt compelled to take on. As she hung up the phone, Naomi leaned back in her chair, reflecting on how far she had come. Just a year ago, she had been fighting for her own survival in a toxic workplace, uncertain of how her story would end. Now, she was in a position to shape the futures of others, to help create environments where women, people of color, and anyone who felt marginalized could thrive. The power of that realization filled her with a deep sense of purpose. Her journey hadn't just been about winning her own fight, had been about creating a ripple effect, one that would continue to grow and influence change for years to come. Later that afternoon, as Naomi sat in the living room with Jason, she brought up the call from Margaret Green's office. "They want me to consult on rebuilding their corporate culture from the ground up," Naomi said, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "It's a huge project, Jason. I'm not sure I'm ready for something this big." Jason looked at her, his eyes full of understanding. "Naomi, you've already taken on so much, and you've done it with grace and strength. If anyone can handle a challenge like this, it's you. You've already proven that you have the vision and the drive to create real change." Naomi smiled, though the enormity of the task weighed heavily on her. "It's just a lot, and I don't want to lose sight of what really matters to our family." Jason took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You'll find the balance. You always do, and Isaiah and I will be here, supporting you every step of the way, just like we always have." Naomi nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had learned so much from this journey about resilience, about standing up for herself, and about the importance of surrounding herself with people who believed in her. And now, with Jason and Isaiah by her side, she felt ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. Later that evening, after Isaiah had fallen asleep, Naomi sat at her desk, writing down her thoughts. Her mind raced with ideas for how to tackle the task aheadways, to help companies implement policies that would create a more inclusive and supportive environment. It was a massive undertaking, but Naomi knew she was ready. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the future of corporate America, for the next generation of workers who would one day walk into offices just like the one where she had fought her battle. She wanted to make sure they would be met with opportunity, respect, and equality. As Naomi's work gained more attention, she started to connect with other women who had faced similar challenges. She met with women from different industries: tech, finance, media, each with their own stories of discrimination, microaggressions, and the quiet battles they had fought to claim their rightful place in the workforce. One evening, Naomi hosted a small gathering at her home, inviting some of these women to share their experiences. The conversation was raw and emotional, but also filled with hope. Each woman had her own story of triumph, of how they had found ways to rise above the obstacles placed in their path. "I never thought I'd be able to speak openly about what I went through," one woman said, her voice trembling. "But seeing how you stood up for yourself, Naomi, it gave me the courage to do the same." Another woman nodded in agreement. "It's easy to feel isolated in the corporate world, like no one else understands what you're going through. But hearing your story and the stories of others, it's a reminder that we're not alone in this. We're stronger together." Naomi listened, her heart full as she realized how much power there was in community. The battles she had fought and won weren't just for her. They were for every woman, every person of color, every marginalized individual who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And now they were coming together, sharing their stories and creating a movement. By the end of the evening, Naomi felt energized in a way she hadn't expected. The fight for workplace equality wasn't over, it was just beginning. But now she wasn't fighting alone. As the months passed, Naomi's work continued to grow. She consulted for companies across the country, helping them build more inclusive environments and ensuring that their diversity initiatives were more than just empty promises. She became a mentor to younger women, guiding them as they navigated the complexities of corporate life, and encouraging them to stand up for themselves when faced with discrimination. But through it all, Naomi never lost sight of what mattered most: her family. Isaiah was growing fast, his infectious laughter filling their home with joy. And Jason, ever the steady presence in her life, was her constant source of strength and love. One evening, as they sat together in their backyard, watching the sun set over the horizon, Jason turned to Naomi with a smile. "Do you ever stop and think about how far you've come?" he asked, his voice full of pride. Naomi glanced at him, her heart swelling. "I do," she admitted. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago that I was sitting in Ethan's office, wondering how I was going to survive. But now, looking at everything we've built, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the fight because it brought me here. It gave me a voice, and it gave me the chance to make a real difference." Jason smiled, pulling her close. "You've changed so much, Naomi. And you've changed the world around you, too." Naomi rested her head on his shoulder, the quiet contentment of the moment washing over her. She had fought for her future, for her son's future, and for the future of countless others who deserved better. And though there was still much work to be done, she knew that she had laid the foundation for something lasting, something that would continue to grow long after her battle was over. As Isaiah grew older, Naomi often thought about the kind of world she wanted him to inherit. She had spent years fighting for justice, for equality, for fairness, and now she was determined to pass those values on to her son. One afternoon, as they sat together in the park, Naomi watched Isaiah play in the grass, his laughter ringing out in the afternoon air. She smiled, her heart full of love and hope for the future. Isaiah toddled over to her, holding up a flower he had picked from the ground. "Mama," he called, his voice full of joy. Naomi took the flower from him, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, pulling him into her lap. As she held her son close, Naomi realized that her journey wasn't just about changing the corporate world, it was about creating a better world for him, for all the children who would one day walk in her footsteps. She wanted him to grow up in a world where people were judged by their character, not by the color of their skin or their gender. A world where everyone had an equal chance to succeed. And as she sat there, with Isaiah in her arms and the future stretching out before them, Naomi knew that her fight had been worth it. She had created a legacy built on courage, resilience, and hope. And that legacy would live on, shaping the world for generations to come. Thank you for joining me on Naomi's journey of resilience, courage, and justice. If this story inspired you or made you think about the importance of standing up for what's right, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Stay connected for more powerful stories that highlight the strength of the human spirit, the fight for equality, and the pursuit of a better future. And remember to click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means the world lets continue making a difference together. And now, those students were finding their voices and pushing back against the system. At Brookwood Academy, the changes initiated by Emily Henderson continued to transform the school. With new policies in place, the admissions process became more transparent, and the focus shifted toward building a truly inclusive community. The school's Diversity and Inclusion Office, created in the wake of the lawsuit, became a central hub for student-led initiatives aimed at promoting equity and addressing bias. One of the first major changes was the formation of a student advisory board, which included representatives from different racial, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds. Jasmine and Chloe were invited to join the board, and while they were initially hesitant, they saw it as an opportunity to help shape the future of Brookwood. The first meeting of the advisory board was filled with nervous energy, as students from different grades and backgrounds gathered to discuss their visions for the school. Jasmine, who had always been more outspoken, took the lead, while Chloe offered her quiet but insightful input. "We need to make sure that the changes we're making aren't just on paper," Jasmine said during the meeting. "It's not enough to change the admissions process, we need to change the way people think. We need to create a culture where everyone feels like they belong, no matter who they are." The other students nodded in agreement, and soon the conversation flowed freely, with ideas for workshops, cultural events, and mentorship programs aimed at fostering understanding and unity within the student body. Under Emily's leadership, Brookwood also began reaching out to communities that had been historically underrepresented at the school. They partnered with local organizations to recruit students from diverse backgrounds and provided scholarships to ensure that financial barriers wouldn't prevent deserving students from attending. Emily herself worked tirelessly to rebuild trust within the Brookwood community. She held regular town hall meetings with parents and faculty, where she addressed concerns and shared updates on the school's progress. She made it clear that Brookwood was committed to becoming a leader in educational equity. And while some parents remained resistant, the majority embraced the changes. One afternoon, as Jasmine and Chloe were leaving school, they stopped to talk with Emily, who was walking across the campus. "You've both done so much to help make these changes happen," Emily said, her voice warm with admiration. "Brookwood is better because of you." Jasmine smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "It wasn't just us. A lot of people fought to make this happen." "True," Emily replied, "but you were the spark that ignited the change." As Jasmine and Chloe walked away, they reflected on how far they had come. They had once felt like outsiders, unsure of their place at Brookwood, but now they were part of something much bigger, a movement toward a more just and inclusive future. While Brookwood Academy was undergoing a transformation, the Carter family was focused on rebuilding trust, both within their own family and in the community. The emotional toll of the lawsuit and the public scrutiny had been immense, but now that the battle was behind them, they were beginning to heal. Ethan and Vanessa, who had always been a strong team, took time to reconnect with each other and with their daughters. They made a conscious effort to spend more time together as a family, away from the pressures of their respective careers. Weekend trips, family dinners, and quiet evenings at home became a regular part of their routine. For Jasmine and Chloe, the process of rebuilding trust within themselves was more personal. The past year had tested their resilience, but it had also taught them important lessons about their own strength and the power of their voices. Jasmine, who had always felt the need to prove herself academically, began to let go of the idea that her worth was tied to her achievements. She realized that her place at Brookwood wasn't something she had to justify, it was something she had earned. She also started to explore her interests outside of academics, joining the school's debate team and getting involved in student government. Chloe, who had struggled with anxiety and self-doubt, found solace in her art. She began to use her creativity as an outlet for her emotions, expressing through painting and drawing what she couldn't always put into words. Her art teacher noticed her talent and encouraged her to showcase her work in the school's annual art exhibit. "I didn't think anyone would want to see my stuff," Chloe admitted one afternoon, as she showed her parents one of her latest paintings. Vanessa smiled, admiring the vibrant colors and intricate details of Chloe's work. "Your art is beautiful, Chloe. You have a gift, and the world deserves to see it." With her parents' encouragement, Chloe agreed to submit her work to the exhibit. On the day of the event, as students and parents wandered through the gallery, Chloe watched nervously from the sidelines, unsure of how her art would be received. But as people stopped to admire her paintings, offering compliments, and asking about her process, she felt a sense of validation she hadn't expected. One of the visitors to the exhibit was Professor Reynolds, the board member who had supported the changes at Brookwood. He paused in front of one of Chloe's paintings, studying it carefully. "This is remarkable," he said, turning to Chloe with a smile. "You have a real talent." Chloe blushed, feeling both proud and shy at the same time. "Thank you. It means a lot." As the evening went on, Chloe realized that she had found her place not just as a student at Brookwood, but as an artist with a voice of her own. The Carter family had been through a storm, but they had come out stronger on the other side. With the lawsuit behind them and Brookwood Academy on a new path, they were ready to focus on what mattered most to each other. One summer evening, the family gathered in their backyard for a barbecue, a tradition they had started before the chaos of the lawsuit had consumed their lives. The smell of grilled food filled the air as they laughed and talked, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. Jasmine and Chloe sat on the patio, reminiscing about their first day at Brookwood and how much had changed since then. "I never thought we'd get through all of that," Jasmine said, sipping lemonade. "But here we are." Chloe nodded, her eyes softening. "I'm glad we didn't give up. It was hard, but we made it." Ethan joined them, holding a plate of burgers and hot dogs. He smiled at his daughters, pride radiating from him. "You two are the strongest people I know. You fought for what was right, and you made a difference." Vanessa, carrying a bowl of salad, sat down beside Ethan. She placed a hand on his arm, her expression filled with love and gratitude. "We all made a difference, and we did it together." As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the backyard, the Carters sat around the table eating and laughing. The weight of the past year finally lifted. They knew that there would always be challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. That night, as Jasmine and Chloe sat outside, looking up at the stars, they reflected on how far they had come. They had been tested in ways they never could have imagined, but they had emerged stronger, more confident, and more certain of their place in the world. "I think we're going to be okay," Chloe said softly, her gaze fixed on the sky. Jasmine smiled, her heart full. "Yeah, we're going to be just fine." Months after the lawsuit had ended, the Carter family continued to move forward, both personally and professionally. Ethan's proposed bill on educational reform was gaining momentum in Congress, with support from lawmakers across the political spectrum. The bill aimed to establish nationwide guidelines for private school admissions, ensuring that no student would be discriminated against based on race, socioeconomic status, or background. On the day of the vote, Ethan stood in the Senate chamber, addressing his colleagues with the same passion that had driven him throughout the Brookwood case. "This bill is about fairness," he said, his voice steady but powerful. "It's about giving every child a fair shot at success. It's about ensuring that no student is ever told they don't belong because of the color of their skin. We've come a long way, but we still have work to do. And it starts here, with this bill." As the vote was cast, the bill passed with overwhelming support, marking a major victory in the fight for educational equity. Ethan, standing in the Senate chamber, allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. The fight was far from over, but this was a step in the right direction. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued to work on cases related to racial discrimination, using her platform to advocate for families facing similar challenges. She became a mentor to young lawyers, sharing her knowledge and experience to help them navigate the complexities of civil rights law. For Jasmine and Chloe, life at Brookwood had settled into a new normal. They continued to thrive academically, but they also made time for the things they loved: debating, painting, and building friendships with students from all walks of life. One afternoon, as the sisters sat in the school library, Chloe looked up from her sketchbook and smiled at Jasmine. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't fought back?" Chloe asked. Jasmine thought for a moment, then shook her head. "I don't like to think about that. What matters is that we did fight, and because of that, everything changed." Chloe nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "We should be proud of that." "We are," Jasmine said, her voice filled with certainty. "We made a difference." As the sisters packed up their things and headed out of the library, they knew that their fight had been worth it. They had faced adversity and come out stronger, and they had helped pave the way for a future where every student, regardless of race or background, could walk through the doors of opportunity with their head held high. The road ahead was long, but the Carters were ready for it. Thank you so much for following the Carter family's journey to justice and equality. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about powerful narratives that challenge society, inspire change, and explore the human experience, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss out on new content. Together, we can continue to share stories that matter. See you in the next one. The police are on their way, Derek. You've lost. Derek's eyes darted around, realizing for the first time that the entire street was watching him. His bravado faltered, his shoulders tensing as he took in the growing crowd of neighbors, all standing together in a show of solidarity. For a moment, it seemed like Derek might lash out, might do something reckless. But then slowly, the fight drained out of him. His fists unclenched, his shoulders slumped, and with one last look at Edith filled with hatred and resentment, he turned and stormed back to his car. The street was silent as Derek sped away, his tires screeching against the pavement. Edith's breath came in shallow gasps, her heart still racing from the confrontation. She stood there for a moment, frozen, until Bill crossed the street and stood beside her. "You okay, Edith?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Edith nodded, though her legs still felt shaky. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to all of you." Bill smiled warmly, giving her a reassuring nod. "We're not going to let him hurt you, Edith. Not now, not ever." Edith's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of fear, they were tears of gratitude. She had been afraid for so long, but now, standing here with her neighbors by her side, she felt a renewed sense of strength. She wasn't alone. In the days following the final confrontation with Derek, the neighborhood watch remained vigilant, but the sense of fear that had once gripped Cedar Street began to dissipate. Derek hadn't returned, and Edith had received word from the police that he was being closely monitored. They had issued a restraining order, preventing Derek from coming within a certain distance of Edith's home or the shelter where Rachel and the girls were staying. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough to give Edith peace of mind for now. Rachel called regularly, checking in to see how Edith was doing and updating her on their progress. The shelter had helped her find legal representation, and she was working towards securing full custody of the girls and filing for divorce from Derek. It was a long, difficult road, but Rachel was determined to keep moving forward. "The girls are adjusting," Rachel said during one phone call, her voice sounding stronger, more confident. "They're starting to sleep better, and we're getting used to our new routine. It's still hard sometimes, but I feel like we're finally free." Edith smiled, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel. She had come so far, and though there were still challenges ahead, Edith knew that Rachel had the strength to face them. "I'm so proud of you," Edith said softly. "You're doing such a good job, Rachel. You and the girls are going to be just fine." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then her voice softened. "We couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You saved us. I'll never be able to thank you enough for everything you've done." Tears welled in Edith's eyes, and she wiped them away with a smile. "You're family now, Rachel, and family takes care of each other." As Edith hung up the phone, a sense of calm settled over her. She had faced her fears, stood up to Derek, and helped Rachel and the girls escape a dangerous situation. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Her home, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a symbol of strength and resilience. And her neighbors' sons, strangers, had become a community, united by a shared sense of purpose. Life on Cedar Street would never be the same again, but that was okay. Because now it is filled with hope, connection, and the promise of a better future. Edith smiled as she stepped out into her garden, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the roses. She knelt down, her hands gently tending to the flowers, feeling the cool earth beneath her fingertips. There was still work to be done, but now she knew she wasn't doing it alone. In the weeks that followed Derek's final confrontation, a new sense of peace settled over Cedar Street. The neighborhood watch remained vigilant, but the need for constant worry had lessened as Derek's presence faded from their lives. He hadn't returned, and the restraining order kept him at a safe distance from Edith's home and from the shelter where Rachel and the girls were living. Edith found herself breathing easier with each passing day, the weight of fear slowly lifting from her shoulders. One crisp autumn morning, as Edith was pruning her roses, she heard the familiar ring of her phone from inside the house. She wiped her hands on her gardening apron and hurried to answer it, her heart lifting when she saw Rachel's name on the caller ID. "Rachel, it's so good to hear from you," Edith said, a smile spreading across her face as she held the phone to her ear. "Hi, Edith," Rachel replied, her voice filled with warmth. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all, dear. Just tending to the garden. How are you and the girls doing?" Rachel let out a small sigh, though it was one of relief rather than stress. "We're doing really well, actually. The girls are starting to settle in at school, and they're making new friends. We've been staying at the shelter for a while now, but I've been working with a caseworker. And, well, we found a place. It's a small apartment, but it's ours." Edith's heart swelled with joy at the news. "Rachel, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. I couldn't have done it without your help, Edith." "Really? I mean it. You were there for me when I didn't know what to do. You'll never be able to thank you enough." "You've already thanked me more than enough, Rachel," Edith said gently. "I'm just glad you and the girls are safe and moving forward." "We are," Rachel agreed, her voice steady. "We still have some hard days, but we're starting to rebuild. I'm learning how to live without looking over my shoulder all the time. The girls, they've been through so much, but I think they're going to be okay." Edith felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she wiped it away with a smile. "You're an incredible mother, Rachel. You've given them the chance to have a better life, and that's the most important thing." "Thank you," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I wanted to ask, would you like to come visit us when we're settled into the apartment? The girls miss you, and I'd love for you to see our new place." "I'd love that," Edith replied without hesitation. "I can't wait to see how far you've come." After they said their goodbyes, Edith stood in the quiet of her kitchen, a deep sense of pride and peace settling over her. She had been part of something important, helping Rachel and her daughters escape a dangerous situation and start a new life. Knowing that they were safe and thriving gave Edith a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in a long time. But Edith also knew that healing wasn't just for Rachel and the girls. She too had been deeply affected by everything that had happened. For so long, Edith had lived in a world of solitude, wrapped in the memories of her past life with Richard. But now she realized that she had the power to create new connections, to make a difference in the lives of others. Her small, quiet world had expanded in ways she never could have predicted. A few weeks later, Edith stood in front of the door to Rachel's new apartment, her heart racing with anticipation. She held a basket filled with homemade cookies and a small potted plant, a housewarming gift for Rachel and the girls. As she knocked on the door, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and pride. Rachel had taken such brave steps toward building a new life for herself and her daughters, and Edith was eager to see the progress they had made. The door opened, and there stood Rachel, her face lighting up with a wide smile. "Edith, you made it." "Of course I did," Edith replied warmly, stepping inside and hugging Rachel. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." The apartment was small but cozy, filled with the warmth and light that Edith had come to associate with Rachel. The walls were adorned with colorful artwork, some drawn by Lily and Ivy, and the space felt alive with the energy of a family building something new. Edith smiled as she took it all in, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel's resilience. "Look who's here!" Rachel called out. And moments later, Lily and Ivy came bounding into the room, their faces bright with excitement. "Grandma Edith!" they exclaimed in unison, rushing toward her and wrapping their arms around her. Edith laughed, bending down to hug the girls. "Oh, my dears, it's so good to see you." "We missed you," Ivy said, her voice small but filled with warmth. "Can you stay for dinner?" "I wouldn't dream of leaving before dinner," Edith replied, her heart swelling with affection for the girls. As they settled into the living room, Rachel brought out a pot of tea, and the four of them spent the afternoon catching up, laughing, and sharing stories. The girls proudly showed Edith their artwork, and Rachel talked about how they were adjusting to their new school and making friends. "They're doing so well," Rachel said, her voice filled with relief and pride. "I wasn't sure how they would handle all the changes, but they've been so strong. I'm so proud of them." "You should be proud of yourself too," Edith said gently. "You've created a safe, loving home for them. That's everything." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. "I still can't believe we made it. There were times when I thought we'd never get out, but now, We have a chance at a real life." As the afternoon turned into evening, the conversation grew deeper, and Edith and Rachel found themselves reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. There had been so much pain, fear, and uncertainty, but now there was also hope. They had made it through the storm, and now they were standing on the other side, ready to rebuild their lives. "I never thought I'd feel free," Rachel admitted quietly, her voice heavy with emotion. "But now I wake up every morning knowing that I'm safe, that my girls are safe. And that's everything." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "You deserve this peace, Rachel. You and the girls deserve all the happiness in the world." Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "And you deserve it too, Edith. You've been through so much yourself. You've given us a new start, and I hope you know how much that means to me." Edith smiled, her heart full. "We've given each other a new start." Later that evening, after dinner, and one last round of hugs from Lily and Ivy, Edith said her goodbyes and made her way back to her own home. As she walked down the quiet street, she felt a deep sense of contentment. Life had changed in ways she never could have predicted, but it was better, now richer, fuller, and filled with new connections. Rachel and the girls had become like family to her, and Edith knew that their bond would only grow stronger as they continued to support one another in the days ahead. As the autumn leaves began to fall and the air turned crisp, Edith found herself spending more time in her garden, reflecting on the past few months. So much had changed, not just for Rachel and the girls, but for Edith as well. Her life, once quiet and isolated, had been transformed by the relationships she had built and the strength she had discovered within herself. But with that transformation came a deeper understanding of the weight she had been carrying for so long: grief, the loneliness, the sense of being left behind. Richard's death had left a hole in Edith's life, one that she had tried to fill with routine and solitude. But now, with Rachel and the girls in her life, Edith realized that she didn't have to carry that weight alone anymore. One afternoon, as Edith sat in the garden with a cup of tea, she found herself thinking about Richard. She missed him every day, missed his laugh, his warmth, the way he had always made her feel safe and loved. But for the first time in a long time, Edith felt a sense of peace when she thought of him, peace in knowing that he would have been proud of her for everything she had done to help Rachel and the girls. As she sipped her tea, Edith decided it was time to visit Richard's grave. She hadn't been in a while, and she felt a strong pull to go to tell him about everything that had happened, about the new life she had found after all these years. The next day, Edith drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. The drive was quiet, the fall colors painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. When she arrived, Edith made her way to Richard's headstone, a small smile on her face as she placed a bouquet of fresh roses at his grave. "Hello, love," she said softly, her voice filled with affection. "It's been a while, but I've been busy. I have so much to tell you." For the next hour, Edith sat by Richard's grave, telling him about Rachel, about the girls, about everything that had happened since they had moved into the neighborhood. She talked about how she had found new strength within herself, how she had made new friends, and how she had learned that it was never too late to make a difference in someone's life. "I think you'd be proud of me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I've still got a lot of life left to live, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'll carry your love with me, always." As Edith stood to leave, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew that Richard was still with her, in spirit, and that his love would continue to guide her in the days ahead. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. As the winter holidays approached, Cedar Street came alive with the warm glow of twinkling lights and the festive spirit of the season. Edith, who had once dreaded the long, lonely winter months, now found herself filled with a sense of anticipation and joy. The neighborhood had changed so much in the past few months, and Edith felt more connected to her community than ever before. Rachel and the girls had invited Edith to spend Christmas with them in their new apartment, and Edith had gladly accepted. It was a far cry from the quiet, solitary holidays she had spent in years past, and she was looking forward to celebrating with people she cared about. On Christmas Eve, Edith arrived at Rachel's apartment with a basket full of gifts and homemade treats. The girls greeted her at the door, their faces bright with excitement, and Edith couldn't help but laugh as they pulled her inside. "We've been waiting for you," Lily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. Mom made hot chocolate. Edith's heart swelled with affection as she followed the girls into the cozy living room where Rachel was waiting with a warm smile. The apartment was decorated with twinkling lights and a small Christmas tree, and the air was filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and pine. "Welcome, Edith," Rachel said, hugging her tightly. "We're so glad you're here." "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," Edith replied, her voice full of warmth. As they sat together by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and exchanging stories, Edith felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been missing for so long, a sense of connection, of belonging, of family. The evening passed in a blur of laughter, conversation, and warmth. The girls opened their presents with wide-eyed excitement, and Edith marveled at how far they had come since the dark days of living under Derek's control. They were happy, healthy, and full of life, and Edith knew that Rachel had done an incredible job of creating a safe, loving home for them. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Rachel and Edith sat together by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Rachel said quietly, her eyes focused on the flickering flames. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it out." "But we did." "You did," Edith corrected gently. "You found the strength to leave, and now you and the girls have a bright future ahead of you." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You were there when I needed someone the most, and I'll never forget that." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've been there for each other, and we'll keep being there, no matter what comes next." As they sat together in the quiet of the night, Edith felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. The storm was over, and now it was time to move forward to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that they had all found the strength to survive and thrive. And in that moment, Edith knew that everything would be all right. Thank you for following along with Edith's emotional and inspiring journey. If you found this story moving or relatable, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. We'll be bringing you more heartwarming tales of resilience, community, and the strength of the human spirit. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when new content is available. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.